Episode 1, Future Histories.
Hi everyone! This episode explores a book on technology, to a greater extent, that may appeal to many of us, because it discusses how the latest developments in the field are influencing and guiding our shared future. Future Histories by Lizzie O'Shea takes us back to a time when ingenuity allowed us to correlate influential historical moments. Considering that technology is now more than just a tool, it's easy to see how it may be used as a method to access many facets of contemporary life. This book invites us to reflect on our stake in technology-based governance systems, even as it provides an overview of the changes in rights and possibilities brought about by technological progress and the implications of capital governance. About the author. It's probably a good starting point to mention the author of Future Histories, Lizzie O'Shea. She is the founder and chair of Digital Rights Watch, which advocates for human rights online. She is also a board member of Blueprint for Free Speech and the Alliance for Gambling Reform. She received the Davis Project's for Peace Prize for her work at the National Justice Project, where she collaborated with attorneys, journalists, and activists to launch a Cop Watch program. Access Now honored her as a human rights hero in June 2019. Episode structure. This episode consists of 2 parts. Part 1. We visit the American Revolution to explore how ideas on social welfare, people's participation, rights for social structures, and facilitating cooperation in these structures are formed. Then, we examine the technological influence on capital governance and data rights and ownership in digital spaces. Part 2. A smoother conversation on digital identities. I'll share my ideas on digital determination, security, and privacy. I chose these chapters because, to me, they reflect and help us foster thinking about how we can better make use of pivotal ideas in history and technology as a governance tool, and understand how its methods and usage have been shaping our experiences in digital spaces. And it will be fun. But I don't promise. Let's begin. Please keep in mind that my book reviews are based on my own opinions, and your experience as a reader may vary. Part 1. Tom Paine's revolutionary idea of public participation. Digital citizenship is a collective endeavor. The chapter begins with a summary of Tom Paine's life and early experiences during the American Revolution, which led him to publish his ideas in Common Sense. Later in his life, Paine proposed a universal social insurance system, suggesting funding it through an inheritance tax, primarily focused on land. It's fascinating to see that the idea of a universal income dates back to 1797, where Tom Paine argued in his essay, Agrarian Justice, that a national fund should provide every adult with a ground rent. He strongly supported the notion that any member of society, regardless of whether they function as an effective workforce, should be granted, or provided with, an opportunity to become part of society through capital allocation. To my understanding, Paine envisioned a society where people have equality of opportunity to create a system in which every participant has the freedom to contribute to the growth of social welfare. Not only did Paine suggest this, but he also believed that the wealth captured from resources commonly held by society should be returned to society. Through basic income, this would help provide new opportunities, alleviate poverty, and promote a more equal distribution of resources.
Question. That sounds like a great idea. Equality of opportunities. But I wonder if people would take the money and just do nothing. Plus, I don't think the aristocracy was a fan of his ideology of equal opportunity. This would mean less money, less labor, and therefore less wealth and power for them. Am I right? Response. Well, yeah. But Paine argued that if you can eliminate income gaps and inequality in society, you are more likely to raise and maintain good morals in a society where everyone has a right to be part of it, and therefore function as a whole.
That's somewhat correct. To make it clearer, the author denotes Paine's view as follows. People are not simply economic units whose moral worth is measured by what they produce for the market. Every person is entitled to share in the wealth that is created collectively in the world as part of recognizing his or her existence. The capacity to feed, clothe, and shelter oneself ought not to be dependent on the capacity to do some kind of productive work, especially when being productive is defined within the narrow confines of material value determined by market capitalism.
Good to know that my over 10,000 resume rejections do not define my value. Now, I kind of get it. Paine wants to see society adopting good morals and participating in the development of common welfare.
Yes, and using Tom Paine as a historical model of the idea underlying public participation, the author intends to present us with a preliminary understanding of how participation in society should not be limited by economic welfare. She wants us to rethink how society as a whole could generate value and then distribute it for the common benefit. Hence, in this chapter, she discusses the importance of access to the network in order to participate in society, to engage equally in public spaces and platforms that allow democratic output, and how and why labor is vital to these efforts. She then discusses how technology may help democratize production and redistribute wealth, both of which depend heavily on labor. Come to think of it, don't open source projects foster more participation through collective work? I think open source projects are a great example of this philosophy. What can be understood by this is a democratic society. Through participation, which depends on participants' efforts, aiming for the redistribution of incomes. And I believe there are many communities and groups out there actively employing this philosophy. Although, that's still a small percentage of society. Not its entirety, right? Open source projects serve as a good illustration of this philosophy, although not all of them fully embody its principles. Thomas Paine introduced this societal concept in the late 18th century, and we are still in the early stages of implementing it and making positive, progressive changes. To learn more about Thomas Paine's ideas, check the book list in the resources below, or visit archive.org and search for him. Okay, let's move on. When we talk about inclusive strategies in societies, we cannot omit the impact of digital spaces that offer free basics. The author gives an example of free basics that Facebook offers to its users, explaining that through Internet service providers, ISPs, and cell phone networks, certain services or websites are free of charge to customers. The goal here is to include more people in using the Internet worldwide. I might say there are some positive aspects of free Internet. You're not disconnected from what's going on around the world, and you can ideally utilize information shared in many ways. I'd prefer to lean toward the positive usage of free services, rather than overconsumption just because it's free. Facebook is among those offering free data packages. In India, the world's second most populous nation, people face limitations in internet usage. More than half of the country, living in rural areas, has either very limited or no access to the internet. The premise of free internet access is to provide individuals with the benefits that the internet offers. When you think about it, the internet provides such general value that each user has a unique stake reflecting their interaction styles. With each digital identity, there is a co-equal yet distinct value that the internet brings to the forefront. Together, millions of footprints from our digital identities allow us to step back and think about our societal values and the changes reflected in those values. In early 2016, India's regulatory authority prohibited free basics and other zero-rated services. Although Facebook argued that free basics was more humanitarian, there's an undeniable customer acquisition strategy behind the campaign. You might learn about the extent of India's free basics ban from 2016 news. Banning free access not only limited giant digital social landscapes like Facebook, but also restricted essential information such as weather and health data to support populations' well-being. While there are complexities and nuances surrounding the initiative, I'd like to focus on the main point of network access and its importance. This allows for a more targeted and fruitful conversation about the benefits and challenges of ensuring everyone has internet access without getting sidetracked by the program's complexities. When we mention Facebook, it would be remiss not to mention Google and their approach to free basics initiatives that encourage inclusion. Around the same time, Google announced a project providing infrastructure for easy internet access. With this large project, Google can harvest more data through internet services.
It's not surprising to think of the monetary obligations of a project of such scope. It's also not surprising that they get to utilize newcomers' data just like they know ours.
I'm not sure what to say, but remain positive. One for all for one. Perhaps.
Let's examine another example, this time in a different demographic. Google is rolling out free internet access in New York by providing street kiosks. Douglas Rushkoff, an intellectual and prominent author of Life Inc., among 20 other striking books, not to mention the host of the Team Human podcast, makes his point by stating a real-time, personalized propaganda engine.
Another way of saying, you're not alone with all the ads and products, but indeed, you're not alone with them.
Well, I'm not a very social person, I'd say. Let's move on, shall we? So, the point is, tech giants are aware of the digital divide, the gap between those who have access to modern information and communication technology and those who do not. Therefore, market share becomes crucial to capture in developing countries. Many of these initiatives represent private sector involvement, an example of technological capitalism, as opposed to public infrastructure projects. Over subjective execution of capital allocation and management creates an imbalance of power that could result in economic crises in wealth distribution, especially with respect to investment opportunities that yield broader and long-term returns.
All right, I guess I now see why Tom Paine's resource distribution and the importance of responsive participants can have a positive impact on the workforce and thus capital growth. Now I need to think about how macro market share can create more comprehensive incentives for each level of economic growth. Still, there's much to consider about the mass adoption of adaptive market strategies by tech giants, who have overriding power in wealth redistribution.
Actually, you're right. And the author elaborates on what constitutes digital citizenship. Imagine if internet access was as essential as having a working toilet or a reliable power grid. It's time to think of the internet as a basic utility that everyone deserves, regardless of income or background. It's a fundamental part of modern life, yet it's often treated as a luxury only some can afford. Let's change that by viewing the internet as a shared resource that benefits everyone and investing in infrastructure projects designed with the community's needs in mind. This can create a more inclusive and equitable digital age. However, today's internet infrastructure is more complex than the desirable network rights and rules themselves. In 2017, there was a significant change in laws and regulations on network governance. Network neutrality enforces principles for access, sharing, and information without censorship or interference. This restricts ISPs, internet service providers, from blocking, censoring, prioritizing, or charging for access to online services, platforms, or websites. Network neutrality also promotes free expression, eligibility in digital markets, and aspirations for new technologies and economic growth.
One might argue that network principles enforcing free speech and eligibility in competitive digital markets enable innovation and new services that might emerge. Comment. I guess what was envisioned was similar to healthy progression through equal eligibility to collaborate on improvements, like Linux, a decentralized and open-source collaborative model. No wonder it became one of the most widely used operating systems in the world, with a massive community of developers and users contributing to its growth and success.
I'm going to be optimistic about network neutrality. It's better to have it and execute it than not have it at all. I agree that we see a positive process and rules of succession with Linux production, but it's still ongoing progress. What I like about the author's input on public participation in digital spaces and how she reflects Thomas Paine's ideas on workforce collaboration and accountability is that it encourages us to think beyond economic limitations. Now, let's talk about literacy in digital spaces. Literacy isn't just about reading and writing, but also about speaking. To communicate effectively through verbal means, tone, articulation, and volume. Especially for children, both in terms of impact and their interaction with digital spaces, this requires literacy skills. This focus on basic literacy skills leads us to consider the usefulness of educational digital spaces designed for specific user groups. I'd argue it's likely to have a favorable impact on how youngsters interact with social spaces. We now see a burst of emotional contagion through content shared on TikTok. With background music, cinematic effects, and editing tools, changes in speech patterns, attitudes, how we portray ourselves, and our moral and perceptual values encourage a tendency to conceal our casual, everyday image in real life. Our experiences are shaping our thinking. We're beginning to project a luxurious look, a lifestyle image of ourselves, overshadowing self-value. On the other hand, I'd argue what democracy encompasses if we cannot set appropriate standards for participation. The code of conduct for digital spaces is still a fresh issue and requires a global approach. The author provides an example of the impacts of emotional contagion and administering selected content for different user groups on social digital spaces. Lizzie shares an A/B test case, a user experience research method comparing two versions of a single variable that Facebook conducted in 2014, where positive news stories were shown to one user group and less positive news to another. The team shares their findings. Emotional states can be transferred to others via emotional contagion, leading people to experience the same emotions without their awareness. When positive expressions were reduced, people produced fewer positive posts and more negative posts. When negative expressions were reduced, the opposite pattern occurred. These results indicate that emotions expressed by others on Facebook influence our own emotions, constituting experimental evidence for massive-scale contagion via social networks. You can find the paper Experimental Evidence of Massive-Scale Emotional Contagion through Social Networks in the links below. This brought criticism from users involved in the experiment, which you might have guessed, knowing about Cambridge Analytica. These conflicts resulted from technology capitalism, where we see contradictory polarization. Products, influences, and content on digital spaces usually target specific audiences. While companies aim to target specific audiences for their business, they're constrained to pick the most demanding audience group in their market. Technology capitalism drives global markets, and advertising shapes everything in the global market economy. The monetization of information displayed to users is optimized to show what people desire to experience, and social network corporations heavily rely on a monetize-to-supply strategy.
Still, isn't assessing social trends and more accurately interpreting demographics that conform to societal structures one of the monetization reasons?
Yes, but the primary goal shifts toward the advertising industry, where corporations and their joint ventures can reclaim a competitive advantage in the global marketplace. Funny that you say the global marketplace. It looks like a big sale we're all in. Why not model this business as a global investment in adequacy?
I guess we haven't figured out how to apply our knowledge for large-scale investment opportunities. By adopting a marketplace model that relies on consumer experience, we may have reached a point where we ourselves become profitable for the business by achieving the objectives that motivate us.
Oh, now it falls into place. I get why we mentioned Tom Paine now, his emphasis on resource distribution and the value of active, engaged participants can drive workforce growth and contribute to increased capital.
Yes, and what gives us more clues about the magnitude of polarization that technology capitalism brought to users was described by an early Facebook investor. The plot of a sci-fi novel. A technology celebrated for bringing people together is exploited by a hostile power to drive people apart, undermine democracy, and create misery. I'm not sure if we expect George Orwell's 1984 arms race approach when we think of a sci-fi plot with novel technology to provide equal opportunities for people to make positive changes, not only in their lives, but as members of society. I believe technology can be used, when introduced, to give people a good head start, equally accessible to all levels of society. It's not desirable to isolate groups, communities, and societies on a large scale, leaving them disconnected from experiences, information, and opportunities. But it is desirable to provide opportunities and encourage positive decisions that nurture an overall positive outcome for everyone. The nuance between ideologies is essential in how we approach segmenting people into different groups. Identifying user groups and analyzing demographic changes and societal factors in segmentation can offer a different perspective, a choice, an opportunity with an equally ideal understanding of technology. To illustrate, consider two types of families. The first family has better access that wealth brings, better schools, social circles, interactions, tools, and support. The second family has less access due to wealth constraints, but still has a social circle, a good school environment, interactions within their reach, and tools to create, exercise, and support well-being. These families have different levels of access to resources and opportunities. While both have some benefits, the second family's limited understanding and habits, shaped by societal, economic, and historical factors, can adversely impact their growth and role in their communities. This can manifest in the misuse of technology and information, hindering their potential and contributing to negative consequences in their personal and social lives. Young people might not comprehend technology just because they have access to it. From early on, kids should receive education on information technology, its utilization, and its importance for self-development and prosperous societies. According to Lizzie O'Shea, these obstacles offer an opportunity to reimagine how digital technology can improve governance systems and redefine our understanding of democracy. We can be encouraged to think broadly about the possibilities that network technology represents, facilitating meaningful public participation, though it also has limitations and flaws.
I support her viewpoint. It's worth noting that everyone has a different perspective on how we use network technologies and what democracy means to us, perhaps a shared sentiment in defining democracy. But I share Lizzie's optimism about what we can accomplish with networked technologies.
I think so. She also mentions digital technology makes it possible to connect across space, class, and culture, and build resilient and sophisticated communities, without the usual institutional gatekeepers standing in the way. It has the capacity to create space for a universal, international republic, which transcends national borders and social constructs like race and gender. According to Pew Research, 2024 survey results show that 54% of U.S. adults sometimes get news from social media platforms, indicating significant reliance on these channels. Facebook and YouTube are the most popular, with about 33% of adults regularly using each for news. Instagram and TikTok follow, with 20% and 17% of adults, respectively. This suggests digital platforms are key news sources, reducing reliance on newspapers or television. Social media platforms curate algorithms to determine what content is displayed and to whom, unlike the diverse audiences of traditional media. This shift connects products, news, and people in ways that may not fit all areas involved, often aligning with global market share. The change in monopoly brings us to game theory, where antitrust violations often aim to dominate the market. To safeguard competition, federal antitrust laws ensure businesses at different levels remain in the market, fostering healthy monopolies through positive competition. Just a heads up. There are 3 key federal antitrust laws that attorneys general use to safeguard fair competition today. Antitrust violations occur when businesses engage in unfair practices, and these laws help prevent them. In the chapter's final pages, the author provides historical examples of antitrust laws, noting that recent additions prioritize consumer welfare, understood as affordability above all else.
Here's my no-holds-barred opinion. Consumer welfare blocks healthy monopolies in the macro market. Instead of being consumers, why not become members of the welfare? We can cultivate a broader perception of how to do business.
Right on. The author describes this change by envisioning democratic societies where individual rights are exercised, fostering a shared sense of being members of the public. She elaborates by quoting Nancy Fraser's social arrangements that permit all to participate as peers in social life.
FYI, Nancy Fraser is an American philosopher, social theorist, and feminist scholar.
To summarize, we've discussed Tom Paine, technology capitalism, and how we use digital platforms, and reviewed what we can do for our public spaces. There's more to explore about interacting in digital platforms, redistributing resources, and understanding the importance of participation and contribution in our societies. I'll leave it to you. I'm hoping to hear your thoughts in the comments and shares about this chapter.
Until next time, take care.